Mes chers camarades, bien le bonjour. Le truc qu'on préfère dans les westerns, c'est sans doute les fusillades ou les duels aux flingues au milieu d'une petite ville perdue. Et pourtant, ça, c'était vraiment pas le quotidien des cowboys. Alors, pour y voir plus clair sur cette violence du Far West, je me suis rendu dans un saloon au cœur des États-Unis, au Kansas, dans la ville de Dodge City. Bon, alors, c'était pas un vrai saloon, c'était plutôt une reconstitution au sein du Boot Hill Museum, mais j'ai pu discuter avec un expert du sujet, Brat Smalley, qui m'en a appris un petit peu plus. Ce que je vous propose donc aujourd'hui, c'est de découvrir l'interview intégrale de Brat et de ses potes que j'ai tourné pour mon documentaire, on les appelle Cowboys, qui est disponible actuellement sur la plateforme France TV. Et pour ceux qui vont se demander comment je fais les interviews sur place, tout simplement je parle en anglais, puis ensuite je traduis en français pour les besoins du documentaire. Mais vous voyez que le français dans le documentaire qui sort de ma bouche et vous comprendrez pourquoi quand vous me verrez parler en anglais. En tout cas, c'est gratuit, dispo en intégralité ici et inédit, donc profitez bien.
Hey, barkeep. Two. Welcome to the Long Branch.
Yeah, thank you.
It's, as you noticed, we've got a few saloons in Dodge. This is one of the finest, a local favorite for many years. One of the best places. So if we're going to do anything, you might as well be here. Welcome.
Yeah, cheers. Qu'est-ce que les cowboys ils font dans ce genre de saloon?
In a place like the Long Branch, this is not just a drinking establishment. Obviously, you come in here and have some of the finest, but you've also got some nightlife in here as well. You got guys in here playing cards, thriving sporting business in here. There's also, depending on the night, you could have a 5-piece orchestra playing up here just for entertainment. The guy who owns the place, historically Chalkley Beeson, was quite a musician, a band leader. So when you come to a place like the Long Branch, you could get not just the finest drinks, but the finest entertainment to be had in Dodge City as well.
C'est quoi l'état d'esprit des cowboys qui arrivent ici dans le saloon?
If I was coming in after a 3-month cattle drive, I probably got the first cash money I've ever seen in my life, and I'm looking for a place to spend it. Not just a saloon like the Long Branch, but I could go a couple of doors down here and get a shave, get a bath, get my hair cut, get all cleaned up. Next door, maybe buy a fresh cigar, new suit of clothes. I come in here and I'm ready for a night on the town. Make some friends and have a good time. I got money burning a hole in my pocket, and a place like this, they're perfectly happy to take it from me.
C'est vraiment le temps pour se détendre après tout le travail qu'on a eu.
It's a long, hot, dusty trail riding up from Texas, so you could think of a place like Dodge City as an oasis. And it really was. You could come in here and you could blow 3 months worth of cash and go home just as poor as you were to start out with. And many did. Many did.
Combien de temps est-ce que les cowboys restent ici?
How long would they stay? Sometimes it would depend on how long it took to sell the cattle. Oftentimes they'd have maybe a week or so before they turn around and head back home. Plenty of time to sow your wild oats, as they said.
Quand on arrive comme ça dans le saloon, où est-ce qu'on met notre fusil, notre arme?
It's a good question. See, I'm not armed because I know and I understand the law. I'm the type of guy, I've got nothing to prove, so there's no reason for me to be carrying my firearms inside the city limits. Now, say you're a foreigner, didn't know, you've never been in Dodge City before, you didn't know the laws. It's supposed to be the honor system. You could go in, you might, depending on the establishment, there may be hooks on the walls for you to hang your gun belt on there, knowing that especially if you're going to be imbibing, maybe having a little bit too much alcohol, you could get in trouble. So leave what's going to get you in trouble hanging on the wall. You could also hand it over to the bartender and expect that he's going to be giving it back to you on your way out of town, as long as he's going to trust that you're going to mind your manners on your way out. So it's supposed to be the honor system. Usually things like that, they're not going to get enforced unless you look like you're going to cause a problem.
Si le saloon c'est supposé être un endroit où on peut se reposer, y a autant de bagarres que ce qu'on voit dans les films?
You could look at a saloon as a place for rest. Most of them came in as an opportunity to kick up their heels and have some fun. And there were different kinds of saloons in town. Not all of them offered the same kinds of entertainment. Some were more relaxing, a place just for drinking, maybe playing some billiards or some pool, playing some cards. You had places like the Long Branch where you could come in and listen to some very fine music, if that was your taste. There were saloons on the south side of the railroad tracks that were known as dance halls, where you could go in and have a dance with a pretty girl. That's often where some of the more how do I say this? The more disreputable, amoral
Yeah.
district of town.
I see what you mean.
Just to be clean for the audience. So there, depending on what you were looking for, a place like Dodge City had something to offer.
Qu'est-ce qu'on fait dans ce genre de saloon?
Depending on the place that you would go into, but here in the Long Branch today, you come in, have a cold drink, wash the dust from your throat, maybe sit around with one of these fine gentlemen here for a game of cards, poker, what have you. Maybe you'll get lucky and there'll be some entertainment up on stage, say girls dancing up there, or there might even be an orchestra playing some music.
C'est quoi la réglementation pour les armes ici?
By the time there was actually law enforcement established in Dodge City in 1875, the law was very clear. The carrying and discharging of firearms inside the city limits was against the law. No exceptions. How that law was enforced depended on who was wearing the badge and what side of the railroad tracks you were on. But the law itself was very clear. It was illegal and you could be arrested if you were caught.
Okay. C'est spécifique à Dodge City ou on voit ça dans d'autres villes?
Every community had their own laws based on their own backstory, what was going on there. Although over time, many communities would kind of develop the same set of laws. Usually it was as simple as I said, the carrying and discharging of firearms inside city limits was illegal. In Dodge City specifically, that first couple of years of reputation, when there was no law here at all, that's why they came down very hard on the legalities of that in 1875.
Alors concrètement, ça veut dire quoi quand on arrive en ville? Qu'est-ce qu'on fait de nos armes?
It stands to reason that there's not usually going to be a law officer standing at the edge of town, meeting everyone who comes in to take their firearm. It's supposed to be on the honor system. When you go into a saloon or any other business in town, it's up to you to check your gun, whether it be hanging onto the hook inside the door, giving it to the proprietor of that business, and then checking it out when you're on your way back home.
Concrètement, quand quelqu'un arrive en ville, comment il fait avec ses armes?
A perfect example, I think, from local history here of how that the law was sometimes enforced well and sometimes how it failed based on, again, the honor system, was in the year 1878 when City Marshal Ed Masterson was patrolling on the south side of the railroad tracks, looking into the different saloons, making sure everything was safe and sound. There were a couple of cowboys that he saw inside one of the saloons who were armed and appeared to be drunk and potentially belligerent. He went into the saloon, confronted them with the law, took their guns, handed them to the bartender, assured that they could then take their guns when they left town peaceably. Those cowboys, however, immediately took their own guns back from the bartender, went back out in the street following Marshall out of the saloon. He turned around, saw that they had rearmed themselves, and he physically started to disarm them right there in the middle of the street. The scuffle that ensued They pulled their guns and they had no intention of leaving peacefully. And City Marshal Ed Masterson was killed. He was shot in the belly during that, due to enforcing the law that already existed. But that's a perfect example where the honor system had failed.
À l'époque, tout le monde pouvait avoir une arme comme ça?
Owning a gun wasn't illegal. Anybody could come into town with a gun. The law stated that you could not carry or discharge your firearms within the city limits. The first 3 years of Dodge, that was very loosely enforced, but by 1866, 1867, you had enough legitimate law enforcement on site that they could actually enforce that. So gun ownership was nothing outside the ordinary. A gun is basically nothing more than a tool, very much like a shovel or something to that effect. It's how you used it that became dangerous. So once people started coming in and getting in trouble, that's when the law started taking effect.
Comment est-ce que cette loi finalement s'est appliquée et a durci les conditions d'accès au pistolet?
The early laws in Dodge go all the way back to 1875, really, which was already 2 years after the city was kind of founded, when there was no law enforcement legitimately of any kind. The laws occasionally evolved, at least as far as the enforcement was, based on the traffic that was coming in. For example, early on, it was illegal to even make yourself known that you had ever borne arms against the government of the United States of America, which goes back to our American Civil War that ended in 1865. But by the early 1870s, those hostilities were still very, very fresh in people's minds. So that potential for violence on people from the South who were coming up to a northern city like this part of Kansas, those kind of tensions were still very real. And in order to sort of quell any potential violence, that became a law in early Dodge. I don't know if that was necessarily ever specifically enforced, but it was illegal.
La loi, elle est différente dans différentes villes en fait.
Yeah, every city had their own set of laws and how the entire politics of the town was laid out. For example, in some communities, you had like the city mayor was an elected position. At some points, in some cities, it was an appointed position. So the politics, as they kind of trickled down, led to how different entities were enforced. Guys, chime in whenever you add anything to add.
In modern Kansas, it's legal to carry a gun, but there are maybe places in certain businesses or cities where it's not legal to carry a gun. So they call constitutional carry, which means the Constitution of the United States allows firearm ownership, so you can walk around with a gun. But the bank might say no guns.
Right.
So, but it kind of depends from state to state. You may have to have a license to carry, but back then there were laws, like he said, but they didn't always get,
Oftentimes they didn't get enforced until it looked like you were going to cause trouble. And even then, whereas the laws in Old Dodge City were the same, no matter what side of the railroad tracks you happened to be on, how those laws were enforced varied very differently.
Right.
So, whereas here on the north side, as for like the gunfight that you saw, which portrayed on the north side of the railroad tracks, it was much more strictly enforced. Whereas you head south over the railroad tracks to some of those saloons, and you were more left to your own devices until something happened.
Et vous parliez des armes comme étant des outils, c'est des outils qui sont chers?
I would say in the period that we're kind of portraying here, the 1870s, 80s, it was a lot cheaper comparatively than gun ownership would be today, because it was so much more, I would say, common. Even you look at the price of buying a horse today or a saddle. It's astronomical to get anything quality, but back then it's a standard everyday piece of equipment. So it's a lot cheaper. And I would compare it to, say, even in the 1870s, you're going to spend a little more money on a quality firearm than you would a shovel. But comparatively, that's not quite the discrepancy that you'd see today.
Et les cowboys, eux, est-ce qu'ils avaient des armes?
Absolutely not. Not everybody had one because not everybody needed one. And even then, occasionally, a lot of guys couldn't afford one. Especially you talk about these drovers from South Texas who were coming up north with the cattle drives to places like Dodge City. They may have grown up, some of these kids, maybe 16 to 18 years old, had never seen cash money in their life, which is why they took these jobs to come up here. So no, they probably couldn't afford a gun. And on a lot of these cattle drives as well, you weren't carrying your gun on the drive itself. You, much like you're in Dodge, where you got to check them in a saloon or one of the businesses, you'd check them in with, say, the chuck wagon driver. And then at the time you needed one, you'd go get it from him. For largely the same reason. If you're not wearing a gun, you're not going to get in trouble with it.
Yeah. Tout à l'heure, on a vu une reconstitution là, d'une fusillade. C'était toujours comme ça dans le Far West?
What we just saw portrayed rarely, if ever, happened like that. Most gunfights were over in 15 to 20 seconds. It was a short burst of violence, and then it was over. There were occasionally examples where, like say here in Dodge City, they called it the Battle of the Plaza, in which both sides of the street were shooting bullets across each other, and those kind of things, the big movie traditional style gunfights, where just everybody was shooting bullets and everything else, very, very uncommon. Usually you'd have a typical example of somebody walked into a saloon or out of a saloon, they see somebody they didn't like, they exchange words, both of them pull their guns, and again, it's over in 15, 20 seconds. But this kind of thing that we show here, we like to throw all of the different plot points in just for entertainment purposes.
We mix, the museum is very, very accurate, very historically grounded in what happens. Some of our entertainment brings in a little bit of the Hollywood and the fun. So while we dress correctly, and I would have been a marshal, and there were drovers, the interaction in the actual show is exaggerated a bit for Hollywood and entertainment purposes. But our clothing, our roles, our firearms are authentic. But like he said, there was rarely a time when two big lines of people came out and started shooting at each other. It's just not really.
You get that from the OK Corral.
Right.
Right. Where that standoff between the Earps and the Clantons.
Right.
Right.
The one that we've always talked about, it's always an ambush. That was usually, if there was some kind of dispute, it would be an ambush. Be sneaking up on
Right. There was a famous gunfight in the Long Branch. Two guys were gambling, and they stood up and shot 5 bullets, emptied their guns across the table, and no one got killed.
Like one
got a wound in the arm, but no death.
That's more typical than just about anything else.
And it lasted 30 seconds.
Ça drank too much for
They
it.
were drinking and playing cards and fighting, and so. Or is that the one over a girl?
No, you're talking the Long Branch shootout.
Yeah.
With Frank Loving.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly how it was. They got up. One guy walked in. There was already some bad blood between the two. He walked into the saloon, saw the guy sitting at the table playing cards. They pulled their guns, chased each other around the table, firing bullets, and nobody died.
Yeah, and it was, I know, but it had to have been loud and smoky inside. So
Absolutely, very loud.
That's a real life gunfight. We know about that happened here.
There's one example of, in the old Dodge City newspapers, they recorded the fact that the Long Branch Saloon was going to be closed that day for repairs, most likely to patch the bullet holes. So things happen. People got rowdy, but the mass murder and the violence is really a thing of Hollywood.
Et alors ces fameux duels avec seulement 2 personnes dans une rue comme ça, est-ce que ça se faisait aussi?
Even in the United States in the early days, they did kind of retain that the duel mentality, and it did happen usually prior to 1860s, the Civil War. As things moved west, there wasn't time for that. That's the easiest way of saying it. Again, if you intend to go shoot somebody, you just go do it. Your example of the gentleman's duel, two people meeting out on the street, you see that in almost every Western movie, especially some of the older ones. There's really only one recorded example of that ever happening in the American West, and it was a gunfight with Wild Bill Hickok. It took place in Missouri. And it was exactly that. They planned to be out in the street at such and such a time. I'll be there and prepare to die. They were both out there in the street. There's a reason that you know who Wild Bill Hickok was, because he won. And the other guy is largely forgotten. Right. So really the only time the two men meeting in the middle of the street at high noon, really the only time that ever happened.
Oui, donc finalement, la vision du cow-boy qu'on a dans les films, c'est juste un mythe.
Largely, yes, it's a myth, but while today we kind of like to blame Hollywood for that, it was a myth while it was actually happening. Even in the 1870s and 80s, newspapers across the country were sending reporters out to places like Dodge City to report on the real West, what was actually going on, and they'd go home and fill their readers with these wild stories that completely mythicized what was going on at the time while it was actually happening. So it's easy to blame Hollywood, but that myth goes all the way back to the original places like Dodge City.
Most cowboys were young men trailing cattle, making a living. There was outlaws, there were wild stories, there are the Dalton gang, of robbing bank that happened, but less than you would think. Like Brad said, a lot of it. But even all the way back then, Dodge City is big for tourism now. They even had tourists coming to see the Old West, Wild West, in the 1890s to see where it was happening. Because, like he said, reporters, Dodge City was mentioned in Eastern newspapers a lot. And not just Dodge City, all over the West. It was fascination for everybody even then.
And at this time, you got tourists who are disappointed about the reality of Wild West?
The real story is so fascinating that I think maybe at first sometimes we're like, oh, it wasn't really that wild. But then we tell them what actually happened, and it's still exciting. And there were gunfights, and there were bad guys, and there were bank robberies, but not as much as Hollywood or the newspapers would have you believe. But it was the Wild West.
Absolutely.
And it was lawless, and there was drinking and gambling and shooting. And
when you take just Dodge City into account, like I mentioned earlier, that first 3 years, when there was no legitimate law enforcement of any kind, just the violence and the brutality and the vice and everything that happened just in that very short period, that's where Dodge got the reputation that it was never able to live down.
Merci aux équipes de TSVP, la société de production avec qui j'ai travaillé sur ce projet et qui ont monté ces interviews. Vous pouvez retrouver mon documentaire sur les cowboys, mais aussi celui sur les samouraïs que j'ai tourné au Japon directement sur la plateforme France TV. Je vous mets un petit lien en description et commentaire. À plus.